Remember, your licensing boards of all stripes, from contractors to haircutters to therapists, all they do is ascertain minimum competence to not do harm to the public. That's it. They don't ascertain or try to elevate high competence. They just do minimum competence, rubber stamp from .gov, and then you can go practice and bill insurance.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. We have a great panel discussion today, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves, starting with ladies first. Go ahead, Katie.
Yeah, my name is Katie Kernodle. I'm a licensed associate counselor in the state of Arizona.
I'll go next. I'm Jonathan Cogburn. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Texas.
And I'm Jake Wiskerchen, janitorial. I'm a marriage and family therapist in Northern Nevada.
So something that we've talked about, all four of us have talked about quite a bit, is that educating, the way we educate and train therapists leaves much to be desired. So with that, let's turn it over to Katie first and see what we can flesh out of that.
Yeah, so this kind of came out of a conversation between Jonathan and I, specifically around alternative modes of training people. And so as somebody who recently went through the pipeline, I've recently taken the NCE and gone through the licensing and the credentialing process and things like that. I'm really seeing the breaks in the system, and I'm not sure that it is recoverable. And so I'm trying to think proactively in terms of what are those ground up systems that we can build. And so at least something that has always come to my mind is more of a like a skilled trades kind of way of doing things that is a little bit more locally based, sidesteps the universities and a little bit of the mills. And so I'll just kind of start with that, and I'm curious to hear people with a little bit more experience than myself, your thoughts and things like that.
Yeah, so I was really curious about this idea. I have like some background questions and maybe some concerns, and they're not concerns that would make me say, no, we shouldn't try something like that, or that shouldn't be tried, but things that might need to be game planned for to head off, potential problems down the road. It is a huge problem. I think something that most of us would agree on, maybe all of us would agree on, is that I don't want to go back into grad school at this point. Like if I was going to teach therapists, I don't want to go through a doctoral program. I don't have a doctorate, because I don't want to subject myself to 2 years of indoctrination and either having to clamp my mouth shut or or get myself in trouble and potentially get, run out of town, as some of our friends have been or nearly been, in order to accomplish that. It's not a friendly atmosphere. There are probably a couple of institutions that would be okay, still to go through at this point. It's not an open field like it used to be, where you could go like, I graduated in 2010. In 2010, I'm pretty sure I could have gotten into Purdue's doctoral program if I wanted to. I could have gotten into Virginia Tech. I could have gotten into Texas Tech. And these are some of the top marriage and family therapy doctoral programs. I actually seriously considered it. But we decided to start a family instead, my wife and I. And so, that just wasn't in the cards then. And I'm looking back on that, I'm glad that I didn't, because my friends who went through doctoral programs, guess where they are, every single one of them, politically now? They're way far away from the way that I see the world and the way that I think about things. And, I just think to myself, like, there was some probably divine intervention in me staying put and putting down roots and beginning work and, doing real life stuff. And it's just very concerning. But one of my primary reasons to be on X at all is to advocate for the preserving the good ideas within therapy, and especially marriage and family therapy, because that's my professional identity. But in therapy and psychology in general, and the universities are are making that harder and are in many ways actively working against that.
You know what I think sucks is that I, I this has to be political. That's what I think is wretched. I try really, really hard not to do politics. I formally I was going to. I swear I'm going to go somewhere with this. Formally, I was going to run for state assembly about 7 years ago, and I got super close to it and decided to pull the plug. I never even filed. I launched a campaign, did some fundraising, but I ended up giving everybody their money back, and I realized that politics, you have to mortgage your soul if you're going to be successful, if not sell it outright entirely. And I didn't want to do that. And now politics has taken over our profession, and it's not supposed to be that way. And here's the really twisted part. The people who are pushing the politics don't think they're pushing politics. They think they're pushing righteousness, and it's become a moral battle. And I guess it is. And I hate calling it that because I think I'm about as centrist as they come. I mean, I'm pretty anti-collectivism. I'm pretty pro-liberty, but I don't align myself with the jersey wearing tribes, right? And yet the further left, and we have to call this what it is, it's a leftist political movement rooted in the origins of Marxism and collectivism that's eroding all this stuff, the postmodern deconstructionist efforts that's going through the schools. It is making people like me get labeled as far right. And that bothers me tremendously. And part of me wants to just be like, all right, I guess I'll lean into it. You can call me whatever you want. You can project onto me whatever you want. I can hold your projection. That's fine. But it's wrong. It's just wrong. And unfortunately, we can't have a dialogue with these people. And you know the people, they're in all the Facebook forums and the Reddit threads, and they're just unhinged. They will not listen to reason, and reason and logic have been just completely purged from the discourse, because discourse doesn't happen. It's a screeching, it's a lecturing, it's a commandeering of the whole dialogue. So I see this as deeply psychopathological. The people perpetrating it do not, and I think we're at a fundamental impasse there. So I don't think we can change the institutions, but we have to call it out for what it is, and that means asserting some position, which is not popular in our field. Our field was built so that we could play in the gray and help people reestablish who they are and really never take a position. But when you have an ethical code and you have standards, that is inherently taking a position. And what the people on this screen and some of our adjacent friends are trying to do is reestablish something, right? Like truth, honesty, integrity, fidelity, academic rigor. And that very establishment is in the face of postmodern deconstructionism. You can't have both. You can have postmodernism as a thought experiment, but you can't have it as a policy. Otherwise, you end up with nothing and you're completely unanchored. And I think that's where we are. So simply trying to anchor oneself and say, hey, let's return to the ethical tenets of the profession, you'll get blowback saying, well, that presumes that they've been abandoned, right? That we have to return to something means that we've left it. And the people pushing all this nonsense, the postmodernism, the there is no truth, there's only constructed reality, those people don't believe that anything has changed. They think it's gotten better, right? Like that. So we're fundamentally apart. And I think that the solution, which we're probably going to, I mean, I'd love to discuss this for hours and hours, but we only have limited time. I think we have to create parallel systems. And I think that's what Katie is alluding to. But I instantly see potholes, and sometimes I come off as Johnny Raincloud because I see the potholes and I just want to like tell people how to step around them. So it's not like I'm poo-pooing any of these ideas like Jonathan's saying, but we have to be aware of the hiccups if we're really going to create a new process by which people can honestly explore this in a therapeutically neutral sense without agendas.
So I think there's two issues here, and I'm not sure how intertwined they are. But one is the leftist political bias, like you talked about, which we've fleshed out ad nauseum. The four of us have on this podcast before.
Mhm.
And the other part is just the lack of rigor, the fact that we're not training therapists anymore. Like we're not training to help people with mental health issues. And, I've said before that I think the second one is actually a bigger deal. I've said if at grad school, every class, it was 2 hours of rigorous training on how to be a therapist, and at the end we did a land acknowledgement, it'd be annoying, but I probably never would have spoken out, you know? But I'm wondering how much those two
Mhm.
things are intertwined. How much is this, fluff curriculum due to the fact that, by transforming these schools into diploma mills, we're kind of creating new like congregants in our new political religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, let me
Yes.
pick that up real quick because I left off by saying that nothing has anchoring anymore. If you truly take postmodernist thought to its, and I don't mean postmodern art, right? I mean postmodern philosophy. We take that to its end point. The end point is nothing is real. Everything is a construct of a construct, and your reality is different than my reality, and that's just the way it is. Well, here's the problem with that, and I reach over, and for the listening audience who's not seeing this on video, I'm grabbing my big thick DSM-5 TR. This is
Ooh.
reality. This is a reality in which we live if we plan on billing managed care for our services. So if we're billing insurance, insurance is still adherent to the medical construct of there's an illness, there's a treatment plan to the illness, and there's a solution to the illness, and then we stop paying for the treatment. I'm completely fine with that because I think it's honorable and ethical to terminate care when you're treating the ill. The problem with the postmodern thought in the grad schools is that now the DSM, now we can criticize the DSM another time, and Mark L. Ruffalo has plenty to say about that, but it's still our reality, and we have to deal with it. They're saying that some of these illnesses are not actually illnesses, but nay, identities, right? So now we can wrap ourselves, capital S, in what used to be called an illness and still is in print. But the effort to completely deconstruct all of that into, it's whatever you think it is, and spectrumize all of it makes it incredibly hard to create a formative treatment plan to get people well because they don't want to get well. They want to stay exactly where they are because they've wrapped their identity in it, and to get them well threatens their identity of what we would call illness. So there's a problem. That's just one of them. I just wanted to tee that up because if we're dealing with people who don't deal in reality because you can just self-construct your own reality, then the rules of the game themselves don't even apply. So that's a problem. That's problem number one. I want to kick it around, not occupy the mic so much.
Yeah, I mean, you headed in a direction that I had already planned to head or bring up, and I know we've all talked about this to some degree, but the one of the assumptions of the people driving the political movement that you're talking about is that you can, if you talk about it in the right way, then you can structure a life in any way you want and have equally positive outcomes.
Right. Right.
And that is wrong. That is so incredibly wrong. You cannot
Well,
you
it's
cannot.
because you become God of your own universe, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Definitely on the spirit. That's by the way, for those of you like Christian doctrinal people out there, that is the definition of original sin. In the Old Testament, in Adam and Eve being kicked out of the garden, what does the serpent ask Eve? Don't you want to be like God, being
Right.
God unto yourself? It does not work. And you have negative outcomes, and then we get into the great, the great meme or image of the serpent eating itself, because then you can just blame the system for oppressing me, for not producing the outcome that my actions should have produced, and then apply more collectivism to the problem, and then we're deconstructing everything and turning out activists instead of therapist, as I think Katie speaks more eloquently to that than maybe almost anybody out there, and with really good specific examples. So yeah, we can't be doing that. There is natural law. There are a limited number of things a human being can do that produce good outcomes, and even fewer that produce optimal outcomes for emotional well-being, for mental health, however you want to quantify that.
Yeah, so kind of speaking a little bit to what Jake was talking about earlier in terms of having to take a position, something that comes to my mind is just the fact that reality is the ultimate test. So we can always test things against reality. We can see what leads to mental health and flourishing and what doesn't. And when you're talking about something I wrote down when you were speaking, Jonathan, was that it's about talking about things in the right way, that kind of ethos. The very postmodern, especially Marxist now, way of thinking about things. And I think that it's thoroughly embedded in um like the K-Crep counseling identity. So a huge part of what K-Crep is doing and part of how they market themselves is specifically setting themselves apart as having a very specific counselor identity that's supposed to be very distinct from marriage and family therapy and social work and psychology, et cetera, et cetera. But part of that is literally putting on an identity of a counselor in the sense of almost like what strikes me as cosplay. So it's about saying the right things, joining the counselor identity in a certain way, doing advocacy. And I think that is a significant contributor to the collapse of actual rigor and standards in this kind of core fundamental way, because it's more about surface level appearances than actual rigor. And I'm trying to remember, I wrote down, illness is identity is another thing that Jake was talking about. So, because I think like to really emphasize what that means, because you'll see it right now. People will talk about mad knowledges, literally thinking that there's a specific kind of epistemology in the sense of like standpoint epistemology, which Ryan, you've talked about extensively, that you have a special sight from having a mental illness. So there's some sort of special insight that somebody with schizophrenia or a personality disorder allegedly has to the system that gives them some sort of special insight into the nature of reality in kind of a Gnostic way. And so it's literally elevating, and I say this with respect, but craziness, to versus normality, and inverting what should be normal and having that centered in the professional mental health profession. The consequences of that are very serious, because we're talking about dealing with real people who are dealing with real mental illnesses. And so when you combine that with a definition of wellness that is, overthrowing the intersectional system of oppression, you've got a recipe for basically recruiting people for, sedition, violence, terrorism, etc. So that's why I try to emphasize that I think that this is a really serious thing, and I see on the horizon that this is it's a sinking ship. And so thinking about what we can do in advance to at least maintain the actual work of the profession, because it still needs to be done, even if it's not going to be done within the existing systems and structures.
I want to jump in
go ahead,
right there real quick. I have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, and Katie, I take no offense to what you said. In fact, I want to reinforce it. There's been times in my life in a depressive episode where I thought it was a good idea to take my own life. And there's times in a manic episode I thought it was a good idea to sell my car and get a plane ticket to Israel so I could go fight for Gaza. Like, these are sounded like good ideas. And people who are compassionate to me in my life said, "That's nuts. That's crazy. Please don't do that. We care about you. You're wrong." And I think telling it today, every day I work with drug addicts who think that, on some level think that using heroin or methamphetamine, somehow think that's a good idea. And it's a compassionate thing for me to tell you that's wrong, or, find a way to explain that. But someone who's bipolar or schizophrenic or a drug addict, they don't have some kind of special knowledge. Like getting them out of that state is the compassionate thing. And I think the reason this is so political is because of that deconstruction Jake was talking about. Someone like collapsing into this like mental illness is actually good for their political project.
Yeah. Katie, you make a comment there about, we can always reality test. And my cynical side said, yeah, well, not if you change reality. And that's what these people are trying to do by redefining commonly understood terms like wellness, harm reduction. We think we know what harm reduction is until you get into the grant-funded harm reduction agencies, whose definition of harm reduction is whatever the client thinks it should be. It's like, no. So here's where I go with this to keep me from getting super black-pilled. I trust the marketplace, and I trust the internal essence of a human. So I think that by nature, we all have an attunement to what's healthy and what's not. Of course, we're going to have to bounce off the guardrails a few times to figure out where that is. But on balance, we know what's real, we know what's true, and we know it when we hear it. Now, bad state actors, Orwell points this out quite well, will tell you not to believe your lying eyes. Okay. But if we surround ourselves with enough people who are honest, then that truth will penetrate and bind. And I find this in my therapy sessions to be quite fruitful too. When I just look at somebody and go, don't do that. And they go, yeah, you're right. I shouldn't be doing that. Right. Like when a guy trash talks his wife right in front of me, I go, that's rude. I'll just call it what it is. It's rude. You're not a bad person. You're acting poorly, but I'm going to call you out on it. I'm not going to go, well, now wife, how did that make you feel? Now look at her. Like I'm not going to do that. It's not for people who are already confused. And my fundamental presumption is that they are confused, because if they weren't, they wouldn't be in front of me. So I think it's perfectly fine to trust in the marketplace, produce a good product, and then people will figure it out. Here's where I see some of the hiccups, though, when I sometimes become Johnny Raincloud. I'll use my state because I know it well. State of Nevada, Nevada Revised Statutes, Chapter 689A is the chapter that governs individual insurance plans. It says that if you're going to do business in the state of Nevada, you must pay out claims for properly rendered services by people whose scope it is to render those services, right? Okay, fine. Well, then we trace that back. Who's a properly authorized person in this state? We call them licensed healthcare professionals or whatever. So those have different chapters. My chapter happens to be Nevada Revised Statute 641A, and that governs the MFTs. And this, we call them CPCs here. They call them LPCs everywhere else, or MHCs in the East Coast. But that governs my people. Social workers have a different chapter. Psychologists have a different chapter. Medical doctors have a different chapter. Anyway, so on and so forth. They're all included in this. If you're in this chapter, you can bill for these services for insurance and get reimbursed. Cool. Within that chapter, it tells you how you can become a licensed person. So for marriage and family therapists, clinical professional counselors in the state of Nevada, you must do one of two things: graduate from a KCREP or COAMFT accredited program, or match the state's matrix of coursework. And if you map correctly to that matrix, they will sign and authorize you through. But within that coursework matrix, guess what it reflects? The KCREP standards. So there's very little difference. Usually it says something like must have a 60 credit program, which means that the 48 credit programs just aren't good enough. So if you want to go and get a license in the state of Nevada and call yourself a licensed professional regulated by all the people, well, then you have to hit those standards. And if you come from a non-accredited or a differently accredited institution, just not going to get a license in Nevada. I'm not going to get into too much of the political going on and the chicanery that's occurring right now, having to do with the compact and all that. But let's just say it's not favorable to the citizens who would otherwise receive care. What I will say is that if you wanted to set up shop and just call yourself a consultant who's trained in mental health and has a degree, you'd probably do pretty well if you're competent, because there's lots of incompetence that just happens to be licensed. And remember, your licensing boards of all stripes, from contractors to haircutters to therapists, all they do is ascertain minimum competence to not do harm to the public. That's it. They don't ascertain or try to elevate high competence. They just do minimum competence, rubber stamp from .gov, and then you can go practice and bill insurance. Interestingly, and I'll quit after this, in Chapter 689A, which governs the insurance plans, they don't list the associated interns for each of the licenses. So technically, if they wanted to deny a claim from an intern of my agency, they probably could under the authority of the law. Now, that'd be a very overly conservative interpretation of the law, and I'd probably win in court if it went that far, because that's not the spirit of what the legislature wanted. But nonetheless, it's not listed in black and white that marriage and family therapist intern can be bill for that insurance. It's just, the fully licensed people. So there's fight number one, is if we wanted to erect a parallel structure, let's say we have our University of Austin or whatever, University of Rogers. There's a Rogers University, I believe, actually.
Sure.
And there isn't a Wiskerchen. We'll call it University of Wiskerchen. Whiskers U. We'd have to hit all the criteria that the states request of us if we want licenses in those states.
Yeah, so that's practical problem number one. I actually had, thinking about Katie's idea, I had a little Jake Wiskerchen on my shoulder kind of whispering in my ear when I was thinking about that. I know. You live in people's heads rent-free sometimes, sir. You should know. I forgot that you had a soundboard. Oh my gosh. That honestly kind of scared me a little bit. We got props. We can't have a Thursday night podcast with Ryan without props, people. Okay,
Anyway,
okay. But let me finish my sentence though. I had a little Jake Wiskerchen on my shoulder because in different contexts, you and I have had conversations about, or I've overheard you have conversations about how we fought really hard for legitimacy in the medical model, and we actually probably needed our professional associations to fight a little harder for legitimacy of our profession in the medical model, and say for increasing insurance reimbursement, which hasn't increased in decades, because it's making remaining in the profession unsustainable for people who are billing insurance, or at least much more difficult. And something y'all may not know, maybe even Ryan doesn't know, in Texas we had like a major legal battle. I would have to look back to tell you what year it started, but it started somewhere around 2004. And it concluded around 2014. The Texas Medical Association, the doctors in Texas, professional organization, filed a lawsuit that ended up going to the Texas Supreme Court. And what they were trying to do was remove mental health professionals' legal protection or statutorily allowable responsibility to diagnose mental disorders. They wanted
right.
physicians to be the only ones who were allowed to diagnose. And so this was like a decade-long legal battle that thankfully the Texas Medical Association ended up losing. But it was all predicated on this idea that, and it was only against marriage and family therapists, because we changed our board rules to more accurately state what we were doing in terms of mental health diagnosis, and it created an avenue for them to legally attack, basically. And
Yeah, the
so,
AMFT will never let us forget their part in helping defeat that lawsuit too.
yes, which I'm not. I truly don't know how monumental their part was. I know they were asking for money a lot. I kind of doubt it was tremendously monumental. Um, Yes, but still, yet still, they won't let us forget. Um, so there is this idea of we need to, at some level, prioritize the legitimacy of the profession or preserve the legitimacy of the profession, which is kind of funny. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, well, moving it to more and like a trades apprenticeship training model. Um, I have no problem with that, but I think the criticism externally is going to be, well, that's not as credible if you do it in a university. What was so funny to me just now is I'm like, well, it's not discrediting it anywhere near as much as the lack of rigor is discrediting it, or the degree of ideological polarization is discrediting it. It's not widely discredited in the general public, but man, I'm afraid we're headed that way.
But
And so
Jonathan, they
that
don't see that. They don't see
I know.
that. They don't even think it's a thing.
Yeah.
You could poll the entire United States and see what their appearance of mental health professionals is, or their experience with them, because at this point, like, many people have gotten experience, and it could be overwhelmingly negative, and the university would be like, well, that's not our fault. Like,
Mhm. Yeah. It's all post hoc rationalization to justify why the problem is external and it's not our own actions that are contributing to. Hello, let me introduce you to the principle of mutuality from general systems theory, which states that in any interaction involving two entities, both entities are partially responsible for the outcome, even in situations where they possess unequal power.
you're victim blaming.
I'm victim blaming
Stop
right
victim
now.
blaming.
Cancel me. I was joking. I was joking with Patrick, our friend Patrick, today that Dr. Perrin is gonna beat him to Nirvana, but I'm going to get canceled before him. So he's gonna lose. He's gonna lose twice. So there's a bookmark to send to him later about me getting canceled. But so that's a thought. We've got to. I personally really like Katie's idea. Um, Y'all tell me if I'm wrong. Um, you really don't learn how to do therapy in a classroom.
Correct.
Where you learn to do therapy is in supervision
Yeah. Internship.
and internship co-therapy. That is the lab in which you learn to do this job. And that is very nicely, naturally aligned with like a trades apprenticeship model, I think. I don't see a problem with that.
Yep.
I think we would just have to be ready to anticipate, the external criticism and kind of have some really good back pocket answers to that. And that idea of what, well, the having really good information, really good as evidence based as you can make evidence based when it comes to social sciences about what produces good therapists. What is the learning environment that actually gives you desirable outcomes in terms of
I,
quality clinicians?
I'll tell you what. I mean, no glib, not tongue in cheek. Zephyr Wellness. We do that. We are openly a training facility, and people love it because they understand that there's a high degree of, I guess, I want to keep saying the word rigor, but I guess fidelity that goes into our training. Like I observe lots of sessions. We're shadowing each other when the students come in or the interns come in, or you got a spare hour, go shadow somebody or have somebody shadow you. And it's live feedback right there. And the patients enjoy it because they get extra, right? And that's how we always bill it to the interns. Like, well, tell them that interns are actually better than standalone therapists because they get double the. It's like, okay, well, whatever. That's a nice sentiment, but are they really, right? Well, here I would say we really are. Now, how do we quantify that is the different question. And I have not yet figured out how to capture that. That doesn't involve hundreds of hours of labor that I can't afford, and some sort of system into which we can, put data and quantify it. You need surveys pre and post and ongoing and that kind of thing. And I'm not equipped logistically or infrastructure wise, or even with my bandwidth. But that is a way to do it. And then that would beget something like a consumer reports, review that's not some person's opinion on Google who can hide behind an avatar and trash talk your process, but an honest to goodness, objective plus subjective, qualitative analysis of what an output should look like relative to consumer desire, illness expression, um, time duration, and then ultimately the customer service. Like, how'd you feel about it? Did you enjoy this process? I think we can do that. And I've been talking with people about this for years and years. We just can't get it off the ground. So I think there is a way to do that doesn't have to go through the, education plus testing plus practice hours thing. We can do it differently. I mean, nobody else really in the professional realm that does this except for those of us who think that higher ed is the only way, right? But I'm not concerned about plumbers and pipe fitters or contractors and their integrity because the structure is self-evident whether or not it holds, whether or not water or electricity pass through a conduit, whether or not my deck falls apart, right? And I think in our field, we have just overly emphasized the potential for harm, and it's become obstructionist where it's like, well, we can't just trust the marketplace because people get hurt. And it's like, yeah, bridges could fall down too. Guess what you're doing? All you got in retrospect is a lawsuit. You got civil action to recuperate costs for the harm done. We also have that. That's why we have insurance. So those mechanisms are already in place. We're just too timid and afraid to think that the marketplace could respond appropriately. And I think that has to do with our inherent insecurities and our need to control everything. It's like, well, if government is overseeing it a little bit extra, then we have all the protections. Like, no, people are still getting harmed by therapists. They just can't quantify it enough in the form of a collapsed bridge.
Yeah, it's too abstract. It's way more abstract. Yeah, Kate, I was just going to say, Katie, you haven't chimed in a little bit. What are you thinking at this point in the discussion?
Yeah, because I'm thinking about the need for having that marketplace feedback and how difficult that has become when things are monopolized and gone through the state. So basically, these professional organizations are lobbying the states into having a total monopoly. I'm obviously not a lawyer. I think that there's probably some antitrust stuff worth exploring in that realm. And to Jake's point about licensing trying to demonstrate just a minimum standard of competence or a minimum standard of care that minimizes or doesn't allow harm, I think it's at this point we can show that a top-down capture of these professional bodies has created a situation where it's actually en masse harm that these do not provide that even minimum basic standard. Because like if you think about the basic skills that you need, like, can people do differential diagnoses? Are they doing radicalization practices, liberation, decolonial, social justice, queer, etc., things that are actually radicalizing people to go revolt against their country? I think that indicates a level of harm. I'm also like, and again, I don't have enough knowledge as to the legal dimensions of things, but I'm wondering if boards and states have liability in potential lawsuits in the future if things were to happen and these are the people and the programs and the standards and the credentials that they're signing off on. I'm also thinking too about, like, for example, the National Counselor's Exam. So basically all of the exams for counseling, there's the NCE and the NCMHCE. Both are put on by the CCE, which is a part of the National Board for Certified Counselors. So they have a total monopoly on all these exams. When I took the NCE, the score that you needed to pass was like something like 50%. So we're talking you only need to do 50% of a 150 multiple choice question of very basic things to meet that very minimum licensing threshold. So I think, and I completely understand everyone's concerns and comments, and I do think this is a very challenging thing to address, but I do think with a marketplace feedback, being able to show people who are well-trained can demonstrate rigor and standards and, some tether to objectivity, I do think people will respond to that. And I think the fruits will be in how people change. And I do think the marketplace will kind of work itself out. But a huge part of overcoming that is overcoming the very potentially illegal monopoly that some of the professional bodies have, used the state to bring about.
So let me throw a ground level observation into this too, as we're talking about the quality of graduates, and we're talking about rigor and fidelity. On I don't remember which. I think I talked about it on your podcast, Ryan. That we have some good research into at least some of the things or some of the key foundational things that make therapists effective. I really like the work of Scott D. Miller. He is one of my favorite researchers out there. Um, so if y'all are familiar with the whole pie chart that had, here are the factors that contribute to change in therapy, and then we find out, well, 60% of change is the result of extra therapeutic factors, meaning things that happen in the client's life that could be influenced by them being in therapy, but there aren't a therapy intervention did not take place in the relationship between the therapist and the client. And so there you go. 60% of change is not something that's happening in the therapy room already. And then the pie chart chunks get smaller and smaller, but you find, well, the therapeutic relationship is the next largest percentage out of that. And then the two factors remaining are the techniques used and hope. These are the factors that produce change. So Scott Miller was in on the initial research that turned that out. He did subsequent research, and they looked at what are the therapist controlled factors that contribute to positive outcomes. They only found one out of all the possible variables they could measure or that they could think of to measure or try to measure. The therapist's ability to connect with a wide variety of life experiences is the only therapist controlled factor that produces or contributes to positive outcomes in therapy. And the magnitude of it is massive. It produces dramatic outcomes if you are engaging in training and thought processes that in the course of therapy that help to influence the clinician's ability to connect. Another interesting side note for Jake, something that you may not have seen, they did research into how effective are interns compared with fully licensed trained clinicians. They found that interns in general are as effective as a therapist who's been practicing for up to 15 years. And actually, clinicians who've been practicing for 15 years need to be actively doing something to maintain their flexibility to engage with a wide array of life experiences, or their clinical skill, that ability to connect with a wide array of life experiences starts to diminish. And this fits what we know about cognitive development and aging. You get into automaticity, you stop looking for new stimuli because everything starts looking the same. This tree looks like that tree, and you end up missing details, and you actually, you're doing pruning, you're losing neurons, and so you actually have to work harder at 15 years onward to stay as competent as you were. So now, that being said, I don't think far leftist politics is positively influencing our trainees in being able to flexibly adapt and connect with a wide array of client life experiences. And my evidence would be the number of times I've been called a bigot, a Nazi, a mediocre white man, a transphobe in all of our therapist groups. And then I screenshot these things, I post these things sometimes. This is this is concerning. There's some philosophical opposition, incompatibility there. I don't think we have to. I don't think we have to measure the difference in effectiveness necessarily. I'm kind of like Jake. Like, the market may take care of some of that, but that's just kind of a ground level thought process about it. I think if we are training people in the foundational concepts well, and we're giving them that, we're giving them at least very carefully constructed opportunity to develop that flexibility that encourages them to connect to a wide array of client life experiences, then the product will show itself. I think it will. See, here's another thought too. This may sound weird, but I think it would be harder to go the trade school route in Texas than it might be in states where things are maybe a little bit more extreme. Although the state government may kind of squelch you there. Texas's board is actually pretty effective. Like, it is in terms of operations, it's very effective. They have streamlined a bunch of things. They brought all the licenses under one umbrella. There are like dedicated employees for social work and marriage and family therapy and LPCs and psychologists, but it's one unified council. It's called the Behavioral Health Executive Council. And man, you would send in your license renewal and just pray to the Lord that, and send it via certified mail, because you might not get renewed. But now you've submitted online and you have it back in like a week and a half, 2 weeks. It is incredible. And the CEUs are all streamlined, digitized. And there's, in Texas, there's not as, like, the board rules and the statutes they're not woke. We haven't drifted very far left in terms of what is on the books here. Now, that being said, I think I have known a lot of the recent leadership of the state organization, the professional org here in Texas, which is still rocking along, in spite of AAMFT's efforts to subsume it. And it's very left, very pro trans lobby, all of that stuff. And there's a lot of interaction between the professional org and the board. And so, I think there are people who would want to take it that direction. There's just not will. There's not public will, and there's people watching and concerned. So, I think that it's kind of like the sky is not falling would be the feeling here. It might be hard to get it going, but I would love to see just the parallel opportunity, man. Especially, okay, here's something fun. I ran across this the other day, and I was like, this is perfect for our discussion. So AAMFT still sends me stuff sometimes, which is funny because I've sent them lots of tersely worded letters, and they still send me things. They just like to hear from me, I guess. So they sent this article: declining interest in doctoral training raises questions about the future of MFT research. This is just from a few days ago. Here's some interesting statistics for you. This is from the 2025 MFT industry workforce study. 56% of currently practicing MFTs who responded to the survey neither hold nor plan to pursue a PhD. So,
oh no, not that.
More than half. 20% say they might consider pursuing one in the future. 19% already hold one, and 5% are currently enrolled in a doctoral program. So there's a few vital stats for you. Among those who do not plan to pursue a doctoral degree, here are the themes that emerge in the qualitative answers. 40% say, yep, it's in there. 29%, let's just jump to that one, Jake. 29% identify the cost of doctoral education as the primary barrier.
Well, not just that, but the return on investment. There isn't any.
Yes. Well, 34% question the return on investment, citing uncertainty about whether a PhD will meaningfully advance their careers.
Well, that's 63%
Yeah.
total by my count says money.
Yep.
Yeah, well, you got to make it worth something.
40% say a doctorate is not necessary for their career goals.
Also true.
So there's a little bit of a looming crisis with just replacing the professors that we have. If things continue to trend that way, the idea of a trade model, I don't know if you could do that as a doctoral route. I hadn't even considered that, honestly. I think you'd have to have more academics involved, and you'd have to have some statistical, research training and things like that. But in any case, there's already a problem. The problems are coming for the professions as a whole.
Does anybody
Go ahead.
know how much our profession has expanded, like in the last 20 years, like number of new professionals, number of graduates, anything like that?
I'm pretty sure it's grown. I saw something several years ago that said that it was like the fastest or one of the fastest growing. It's like the fastest growing in human sciences, something like that, or highest in demand. And I was like, yeah, I believe it, because mental health was becoming everybody's favorite thing to talk about. This was probably 6 years ago.
Do y'all think we're approaching like a therapy bubble? Because to me, what I'm looking at is it's like I'm looking at diploma mills that are just pumping out graduates, and I'm thinking this whole everybody needs a therapist thing. Like we're running into a wall where that bubble's gonna burst.
Saturated.
Katie, what do you got?
Market saturated.
Oh yeah, I definitely think we're past saturation. I think I guess it probably depends on the specific profession, but when I think about counseling, like 2023, 2024, like right after COVID, a lot of online diploma mill stuff, a lot of these online programs too, as far as I understand, they advertise having no set login times, which as far as I understand means class. So they're 8-week courses. You could just churn people through at extremely high volume with very little demand on your university, because you're just reusing the same recording. You have adjunct professors from your KCRET PhD programs who need something to do with their KCRET PhDs and are, doing like basic grading and stuff like that. So you have, massive oversaturation. If anyone like tries to go on Psychology Today in their local area and tries to find a therapist, you're just searching through endless. Yeah. And everyone sounds the same and looks the same. It could be completely overwhelming if you're just starting from scratch and you really have no idea where to begin and how to discern looking for a therapist.
You're not being very
encouraging. It didn't used to be that way either.
Considering I graduated a month ago.
I'm sorry.
No,
Ryan.
but Ryan, you got to understand, like, distribution curve, right? Like, I've said this to you guys before we started recording, and I said it over text message, and I've said it in other places, but like, I've been training students for almost 11 years now at my place, and before that I worked side by side with new graduates, and I was one at one point 15 years ago. There has been a cliff drop of competence in the last 4 to 5 years, certainly the last 5 to 8, and you will not be short of work. You, Ryan, will not be short of work. Other people are short of work. And it's wild to me to look at what's going on. I'm actually excited to see the results of this study that our Washoe, our county, our Washoe Human Services people have been doing for a few months now. I think it's going to get published here shortly. But they were trying to figure out what's going on in the workforce, because Nevada ranks dead last in everything that you don't want to rank dead last in. And we're 51st in behavioral health when you count in DC in Mental Health America's Ranking the States report. And we've been there for years. There was 1 year we weren't, and it was because they fudged the metrics somehow. But every year we're 51st, and it's like 16 years running. We're just a joke. But here's my theory: we actually don't have a shortage of bodies. I think we have a shortage of capacity. And what I mean by that is most people I know, and when I say most, I mean nearly all, everybody in my field, they're not working to full capacity. They're not working 40 hours a week, seeing 30 patients. And a large reason for that is because they're working at terrible agencies that abuse their time and talents and make them do things that aren't direct patient care. Okay, that's fine. That's a dynamic. We can set that aside. But then there's those in private practice, because 15 years ago, I was taught you work for an agency that's probably a 1099 outfit, or you work for .gov, or you work for a hospital system, and then you flee to private practice where it's safe and you don't have to be morally injured by administrative staff. Okay. Well, part of the reason we opened Zephyr Wellness is we wanted to be a healthy alternative and make agency work desirable. So now you don't have to flee to private practice. There's good agencies in town, but it's still 40 hours a week. And somewhere along the way, we all got to put into our heads that if you work more than 25 hours a week, your brain's going to explode and your organs will melt and your head will roll off its shoulders and your limbs will pop from your body. And that's simply not true, but people think it is. So I don't, even the people in private practice are working 16 to 20 hours a week. Now you could pull that off and charge $100 an hour and make a really decent living. But don't tell me that there's a provider shortage. There isn't. There's too many of us, and nobody's caseload is full. Well, now we look at Nevada. What else has Nevada got? A lot of poverty. Of our 3.2 million citizens, about 800,000 of them are on Medicaid. So you're talking, I don't know, 25, 27% of the population. And who takes Medicaid? Nobody. This guy on your screen, I take Medicaid. I take all the 5 Medicaid brands in Nevada, and I have for many years. Nobody else does, because Medicaid's a pain in the ass to deal with and they don't pay well. So where are those people going that can't afford your $100, $150, $250 an hour? They don't get care. But if they could, they probably would. So I don't think we have a provider shortage. I think we have a provider overabundance, a competence shortage, and a capacity shortage.
Yeah. See, the when you started into the capacity shortage, I was thinking, well, it is a capacity problem of competent therapists, and you kind of brought it back around to that. Like that's part of where the market may help to take care of some of that.
Yeah. Ryan's on the other end of the continuum. He's on the tail end of the distribution curve to the competent, highly effective side.
Thank you.
Right? That's where you'll end up.
Yes.
Well, look, man, you've already been in this field for a really long time anyway. So then you go and get the graduate degree. You've been hosting podcasts, talking to smart people all around the world for like years. Like that's how you get better. This is better than any continuing ed you'll ever attend. Hosting a podcast has made me so smart, because it's made me humble too. But then there's the middle.
I could say it was difficult for, over a year to do podcasts with Jake Wiskerchen, Jonathan Cogburn, and Katie Kernodle, and just get like this brilliant, like intellectual, deep conversations, and then go to graduate school classes and play with Play-Doh and do arts and crafts. You know what I mean?
But fun. But then you go to the middle 3 standard deviations, and that's like people who are maybe pretty good down to maybe people who aren't very good, but they're not doing harm. Then you get to the other tail end, and it's like those are people actively doing harm, but they'll never get caught because bad therapy is not illegal.
Yeah.
And you can't prove it. That's why our liability insurance is so low. We pay a couple $100
I might be
a year,
a little
right?
more skeptical than you, Jake. I'm thinking it's not just when you look at therapists as a whole. I don't think it's just the far left tail that's giving therapy that could be harmful. I think there's so much incompetence in our field. I think it's closer to the middle of the bell curve.
It's not a bell curve. I'll just say that it's not an evenly distributed curve. But the point is, people aren't getting well. And we know this by our reports of mental illness broadly. I mean, teen mental illness continues to climb. Adult mental illness continues to climb. Look at any metric anywhere in America. Suicide rates are not going down. What we're doing is not working. So to Katie's point, on the whole, we're not good. We're not doing our jobs. Nobody can argue that unless, of course, you invert reality, which sometimes these people do when they go give their legislative testimonies. I've heard some face-meltingly bad stuff in legislative testimony to convince the legislators to vote on some policy or another. And I'm like, this is just wrong, and there's no one here to rebut it, because if you do, you're called a name.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've got to be willing to be drugged through the mud to speak out on things like that at times. You just gave me a thought though that part of the answer possibly to making the case for an alternative training format like the one that Katie's talking about is there are large data sets out there that are considered really credible. Like I know that Jake subscribes to Jean Twenge. I do as well, and she uses the Monitoring the Future surveys
Yep.
as that's a very good data set that's considered quite reliable.
The
And
YRBS.
yeah, um,
YRBS is a good one.
and so there's data sets like that out there that could be used as a
BRS.
defense for like, hey, our intervention strategy is not working, and even if it is kind of working in some areas, it's clearly not enough to stem the tide of what's happening culturally. And so here's some hard evidence that things are actually worsening globally speaking, that is pretty irrefutable. And it also you don't necessarily have to blame the existing systems to make the case, and then run into a bunch of conflict, symmetrical communication with all those establishment folks that would rather not have a parallel system emerge. It'd be better if we could just kind of slip past them and make a case for some alternative training to lower the not the rigor, but the financial threshold of entry
Katie, I'm curious
for
because
institutions.
you're more into this than I am. My cynicism, here's Jonathan's pitch there and says, well, the big boys with the big deep pockets will just crush whatever effort we have by manipulating the law away from our ability to do that, because they'll expand whatever they think treatment looks like and include whatever we're trying to do at consultation. They'll just rename it in the law, and they'll get laws passed to prevent us from even emerging that parallel system. What's your understanding of how deep the antitrust goes? Would that even be a thing, or would they even not care because we're like a bug on the windshield?
I mean, I do think they would probably care, because my guess is that they see the writing on the wall and that they know that this charade can only last for so long. And so they're going to want to preemptively prepare for when that kind of comes out into the public consciousness. I do think if you could get one, even just one red state on board as like a test case, or just one
A
place
pilot.
where it's as a pilot, as an alternative mode of doing things, I think that could make a big difference. Yes, they would absolutely try to crush that. And I think we're battling a bipartisan thing, which makes it very difficult because you have both
Yeah.
interests. There's so much money in all of the training, the credentialing, the reimbursement. I mean, this is big business. And so I do think it's a very challenging thing to kind of overcome. One of the things I just want to bring up Susanna Alexander, who does a lot of work specifically on KCREP and the antitrust stuff. She's a much better source on that than I am. But one of the things that, and I guess this is to Jake's point, but having some sort of novel, a new name, like ground up kind of professional scope that brings in psychotherapy and counseling, and um basically starts from the ground up instead of just kind of replacing these different kind of siloed professions. I don't know how
Hmm.
feasible that is, but that is something that she's brought up, and I think she has some insights there. But yeah, it's definitely a difficult barrier we're on. For me, I think, uh, and I understand the inclination not to tear the existing system down. For me, I think that there are really serious and dangerous things going on through the existing system, through the ethics, through the training, through the CEs, through the standards that are actively harming people at a mass scale, that I can't ignore. I think it's too serious. But yes, I do think we need to not just tear things down, but to have some sort of alternative mode of doing things. Yeah.
So I just want to like clarify the point that you just made. What Suzanne is arguing for possibly, and what you're mentioning here, is an idea of almost creating a new subfield or a new professional identity out of the existing fields. Kind of like LPCs come from the end of World War II, and you had a bunch of GIs coming home from the war, and we had nowhere to put them occupationally. So we need, well, let's get some career counselors. Let's get some workforce support going. That's where LPCs come from. You get LMFTs, were a product of our times, where you had over medicalization and diagnosis becoming identity. And so it was somewhat a philosophical and theoretical pushback against like taking medicalization to a degree that's actually making people worse. And so it is that kind of where you're headed with that idea, where Susanna's headed with that idea, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think because we have more in common than I think we necessarily recognize, and a lot of the distinctions are kind of surface level and turf war stuff. So like a huge
Agreed.
part of the counseling identity is, I think, like a little bit of an inferiority complex against psychology and other professions, and feeling like you have to compensate for that. And so the things that work for marriage and family therapy also work for counseling, also work for psychology. So I always kind of use the term psychotherapy because I think it encompasses as much as possible, although I do understand that there are theoretical and practical differences between individual and family counseling, for example, or family therapy. So yeah, I think maybe Ryan, this is something you could flesh out with Susanna, because she's really thought about this, and she knows the K-Prep stuff so well. So she'd have a lot of insight on that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So, just as a topic of conversation, assume that we could get this new therapist identity, this new certification, whatever it is. What would that identity be? Like, it is distinctive from the others. Yes, adult Jake.
For those of you unfamiliar, there's adolescent Jake. He's not present right now, but he lives in Montana. You know what's look around and see what's booming right now. What is working in our, we'll call it wellness realm? What's hitting with people? Just free association. What do you guys see? What are
I'm
people
in my own
drawn
little
to?
silo. I don't see a ton out of.
Yeah, but I mean, you scroll social media. What's popular? What do people like? Think about
I
it.
see
Think
a
out of
lot
the
of
box.
almost like closer to life coach stuff. I mean, a lot of like for men, like hustle and grind, productivity, like that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What
Yeah.
else?
I mean, the first thing I thought of is are some of the treatment modalities for trauma focused EMDR, somatic.
Nah, you're in the weeds. I mean, like in the broad populace, what are people following? What are they drawn to? What do they need? What do they crave?
The
Meaning,
TikTok influencers.
religion.
Religion, get up and grind, productivity, efficiency, stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
What do those all have in common? They speak to the core of a psyche, right? The nature of the human self. We have gone so far off the rails with the esoteric crap that we've forgotten what draws people to what matters, right? Why do you think the phrase "go touch grass" is so popular these days? It's because we're not doing it and we need it. So I think the identity of whatever emerges is going to be rooted in something pure and honest and true and inescapable. Spirituality is huge on everybody's, right. Like, and I'm not, I follow Jesus. It works for me. I would love to teach other people how, but you find your own spirituality, right? Because it's lacking everywhere. We're dazzled with mindless bullshit, right? It's instant gratification. It's services on demand. It's streaming. It's like anything but authenticity. And now we got AI just generating all sorts of stuff all over the place like that. I think the human soul is going to get really tired of the artifice really quick. Like we're approaching a saturation point there too, where we just throw off all the chains and go, you know what? I'm going backward. And it's like the third conversation I've had in the last 2 days about this. So I think there's something to it. I just so happened to have bought my kids for Christmas an honest to goodness MP3 player, an honest to goodness cassette tape player, portable, and an honest to goodness CD player, portable. And they are loving those things. So I think everybody's going to start going analog. And I pray that retro becomes hip, right? And we just unplug and disconnect. So I think the people who are going to be able to shepherd his or her fellow mate, citizen, counterpart, neighbor, client through that reorientation to what's natural and good and honest and pure, I think that's going to be the successful modality. Right now, we've got people doing it ad hoc and killing it, right? Just because they're honest. They're just honest. They're like, I just want to go camping and I'll teach you how to do some survival skills. And I want to learn how to harvest my own deer. And it's like, yeah, this feels good. I'm connecting with nature. It's like, yeah, because you haven't for a long time. Our field has done that. We've abandoned the connection with authenticity. This, by the way, I think is why collectivism doesn't work for psychotherapy, is because it abandons the individual psyche. The whole point of psychotherapy is to get one's true self to emerge and be as authentic as possible. And we've just mucked it up. We've occluded it with the idea of collectivism and deconstructionism. It flies completely in the face of everything this field was supposed to do. And it's only happened in the last 20 years. It's crazy. Like that's why it's so pernicious. They're fundamentally at odds. So I think that's what it's going to look like. It's going to look like somebody who can lead people to God. Truly. And that's why I find that speaking truth to people resonates so well. They need it. They crave it.
Yeah. So do you have like the question I was thinking of as you were talking through that is how does that translate into like a new professional identity? Do you see a way for it to get kind of more specific in that way?
The name will emerge somehow. It'll be like, authenticity work or something like that. But that sounds woo, right? But it'll be like that. And everybody. I think John Bevere is credited with writing that religion is man's honest attempt to connect with God or to seek God. And it's like that's what we're all authentically trying to do. It's just that the statists, the authoritarians, the deconstructionists have decided to hijack that and make themselves gods of somebody else's path. And I think the clientele know this. Like on some intrinsic level, we all know that it's not working because they all leave session and go, that kind of sucked, right? And then they come through my door here at Zephyr and they're like, man, I've learned so much in the last 6 weeks. It's more than I've learned in the last 4 years everywhere else that I've gone. And it's not just me, it's all my staff because we train them to go deeper, faster, and go to process instead of content. It's concepts that you guys know. So we pick the best parts of that. We pick the best parts of, religion and, individualism and human rights and, stoicism and like the things that are true and binding across all time, Taoism, right? We integrate it into this thing called humanity, right? And we teach people how to reconnect with that. That's how it'll work. We all have the tools. We just need to shake off the ideas of diagnoses and illness-based models and disease care and that kind of stuff and get back to what's working. Gottman did a great job with that with couples. He's like, I'm tired of people talking about what's broken in your marriage. I want to talk about what works.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. One thought that I had as y'all were talking about these concepts is, Jake, you were making me think back to what worked for me as a student. And it sounds like the type of things that you're doing at Zephyr are very similar to things that I went through in grad school. And I would categorize my training as excellent, on like top notch when I went through. There was one point where I went to the national conference. We were encouraged to go to the national conference, and our professors talked about like, yeah, we have one of the best programs. It's like one of the top programs in the country. We're like, yeah,
Where'd
okay,
you
sure,
go?
everybody.
Did you go to Abilene Christian?
Abilene Christian, yeah. Uh-huh. And at that time it was pretty competitive. Like there'd be over like 120 applicants, and they'd interview 60, and then they'd take 20. So that was the conditions under which I applied to get in. I think it kind of helped me that I was still planning on being a minister at that point, and they liked taking a few ministers. I had no idea what general systems theory was. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Holy cow. It was rigorous, intense. But I had like those national conference experiences. I watched professors from some of those doctoral programs ditch other students because they would try to eyeball your name tag. And then they came over to me and they were like, "Oh, I see your name tag says Abilene, Texas. Are you an ACU student?" Yes, sir, I am. And like, "Oh, we love ACU students. You guys are so well prepared." And that happened at almost every table I went to. So I say that as a point of thankfulness to operate out of as a professional. I'm very thankful because I could not have planned to end up there. and in that position where I was getting such a good preparation for all this. But the best learning happened in the intern room. Honestly, like it got started in supervision, but we had a room that was just for second year interns, and we did peer supervision in that room all the time. Now, we had to be set up really well to be able to have like good structured conversations. So I think a part of what worked well for me as a student was we had to learn we had to learn a lot of models. When I talked to people who went to other programs around the same time, like they might have gone through and learned like cognitive behavioral therapy really well, or maybe a couple of models really well. We had to learn 8 well enough to practice them pure. And then we had to write integration papers. So like a philosophical integration of how does this model line up against that model? And so what that did is it helped to create a really good understanding of common factors across models. So like we've got a bunch of friends who are psychoanalytic, psychodynamic therapists, and I was not trained in that stuff at all. But the advantage that my training does give me, and to try to start delving in and learning about some of that, is I instantly start connecting to, okay, this is the same concept that is in Bowenian theory right there. And this is the same concept that is in solution focused brief therapy over here. And so I start pinning those ideas onto the tree of knowledge that I was given in this process. And I think that is that. Now, not does every program have to be structured that way, or would a program like we're talking about have to be structured exactly? I don't think you would have to learn 8, but I think that would be a really good feature. Would be some emphasis on common factors training, some emphasis on shadowing people, encouragement to do healthy peer supervision, because that was where the ideas really, really came to life, and we were just helping each other through the whole time. I think I hate that so much is online. I would not trade my residential student experience
Yeah.
for anything. Would not trade it.
Hey, off topic or sort of on ACU, did you know a Dale Bertram?
Yeah, yes, yeah. He was there as a professor after my time. I did my teletherapy certification with him, offered through ACU. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
So I want to point out something, just to step back a second, when you're talking about like what a great reputation ACU had, and you graduated in 2010,
Mhm.
right? So I asked around about my program before I went there, and I heard a lot of people who had gone there like 10 years ago or something say, "Oh, it's a phenomenal program," or "I've heard it's such a good reputation," all this kind of stuff. And then I get there, and it's pretty much all the professors are straight out of grad school themselves. They had no idea what they're talking about. We're doing arts and crafts every day, just watching YouTube videos like the equivalent of a substitute teacher in high school. That's what I saw. And I think, this was not 2010. This was 2022 when I started. It's something 2020, George Floyd, Summer of Love, things changed. And these programs that were once very reputable and did a good job training clinicians, something changed where that's no longer what's going on.
Yeah. I'll say out loud too, I think ACU still has one of the stronger programs out there. I don't know exactly what the standing is now. I do really like the current department chair. I think she's a really sound-minded person. She's done really, really cool research on how domestic violence ceases, what causes cessation of domestic violence, um, and just learned tremendous amounts from her. And she's very, an empiricist when it comes to those type things. Um, but I think part of what's happened, like I know for a fact their cohort sizes have been a lot smaller. Like they've had 12 and 15 students at a max of 20, and I think that's happening because ACU now has an online program that's operated out of the Dallas campus. Well, you're looking at applying. Do I want to apply to this residential program and move to this West Texas town of 130,000 people to get this really good program? Or can I just stay in Dallas where I've got all the restaurants I want to eat at and my family's here? And so that's part of the competency problem. I don't think you can learn it in a pure online nearly as well. But there's got to be a residential component that has some quality to it, like a Zephyr Wellness that you can plug into wherever you are. I do actually like the online model for like the delivery of the course material. Like let's do a modalities class, and we're going to cover cognitive behavioral therapy, solution focused brief therapy, narrative therapy, and I don't know, IFS, whatever your models are you're going to talk about. And you do that part online, but then you start integrating what you're learning in supervision, and that's where you're really going to pick it up. I think that hybridizing it that way could potentially work, to bring Katie's model to life. And then you could have, some decentralized internship opportunities that people could plug into. Anyway, that's just a thought, a suggestion, to add to all of that. I was kind of wondering what are other things that y'all that have made the profession work for you, either as a student or in terms of learning outside of the schooling you got. I think that might be good for the listeners to think through if they're not as familiar with training in our field.
Yeah, so for me, I think, and this is pretty much entirely outside of my formal training, but engaging with things like the humanities, I think has been absolutely essential for me to have a fuller perspective of the human person. So this kind of goes to Jake's previous point about people are craving meaning and purpose and religion and things like that. And I don't think that we have enough foundational competence in just the different aspects of religion and culture and the soul and theology, things like that. And I think like philosophy and theology and all of these things, you don't have to come at them from a specifically doctrinal or religious perspective. These are things that you can engage and, like comparative theology, look at it from that kind of perspective that I think could really give people a lot of insight and value into how different people have a relationship with reality and how they understand their place and who they are and who they become, all of those different things. So I think, yeah, for me, absolutely essential is engaging in philosophy and theology and those kinds of things.
I think that's true. And the reason we don't have it anymore is because it threatens the collectivism. You can't have identity politics and individual identity coexist. It's not possible. So we can't, the system as it is now can't afford to teach that because people might escape the matrix. That's why it's not taught. So that's exactly why we must teach it in our, hypothetical university. Patrick Lockwood really wants to do this too. He wants to create a program that's, returns to fidelity. For me, boy, there's a lot I didn't get taught, and it was just probably due to time constraints, honestly. I'll tell you, some of the best knowledge that has been the most useful is cross-disciplinary exposure. So my great dream would be to have multiple healthcare services under one roof. Now we have some places in town that do that, but they're incredibly hard to manage. But I'd love to have dentistry, pharmacy, physical therapy, primary care, pediatrics, mental health, substance abuse, all under one roof so that we can all talk to each other, because multidisciplinary treatment is the way to help people the best. Alongside that, I would like some recreational stuff and some way to build people into chasing their dreams, right? Therapy could do that, but it's easier if you say, yeah, I wanted to take up basket weaving. It's like, oh, well, down the hall is a arts and crafts office, right? Like we don't have that really. So that would be my dream. So interdisciplinary stuff, working with other professionals who are either in healthcare or healthcare adjacent, has helped a great deal. But I think cross-cultural connectivity has been the biggest advantage that I've had in learning how other people either are suspicious of what we do and then come to understand that it's not, or how I can contribute to them because they didn't have any idea about it. So, for example, getting to give sermons at my church on emotional functioning and on psychological function is great, because people no longer saw spiritual Christ followership and psychology as mutually exclusive. They're now hand in glove. I think that's really cool. working with the firearms community, working with tough guy professions, working with attorneys, and helping them understand, like teaching the fundamentals, emotions, conscious and unconscious function, sense of self, right? Like choice theory. Those things resonate so well because they're just easy to digest, and it creates a nice bridge among and between different cultures. And that's made me such a more effective therapist and communicator because I can see how other people view me and what I represent to them, and then also learn to speak to them. So really it's yield theory at its heart, Christian Conti drinking game.
Okay.
But it's so much more than that. It's the interdisciplinary nature of not just our work, but also the community.
So I have a couple answers, and I love the place where I work. I think they do phenomenal work with people with addiction. And I think part of I mean, there's some legitimacy to this, but I think to some extent we've tried to become all things to all people, and try to do everything. And I think for me, like just zeroing in on the population that I want to work with and exactly what I want to do, and like honing those specific skills, becoming like a real expert in this area rather than like trying to do a little bit of everything where you're like never really get a deep knowledge and a deep like skill of working with that. I think that's really big. Something else I love about the place that I work, it's small enough to where we can tailor treatment for individually for clients. So like a clinician might take clients running around Town Lake in Austin, or just really specific things, take them to like a grandparent's graveside to read a letter, something really specific outside of the therapy office that seems really helpful for them.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like we want to be all things to all people because there's nothing that doesn't fit under our umbrella, right?
Mm.
So I get that. It's so hard to become specialized and not overly generalized, because if you become specialized, it seems like you're ignoring things or people or demographics. And yet I think that's exactly what's required. The risk is that you over specialize and then forget how to work with a diverse array of people, right? So that's
Yes.
what scares me about the identity politic therapist things. And if you're saying I serve this community, whatever this community is, you raise your hand and you say I'm doing this thing, it almost seems like it's at the rejection of others. And it's not that way. I know enough therapists. Nobody really believes that. Well, there's probably a few that refuse to work with certain demographics, but it appears that way in our minds, and so we're afraid to do that. We're afraid to say I specialize with blah blah blah, because it's like, well, do you not take me? And I think some of that residue simply comes from me introducing myself as saying, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And people go, oh, you don't do individuals then, huh? Wait, what? Who do you think makes up families? But I've had that conversation a lot of times. Like, people are just, oh, you don't do substance abuse. No, I do. I do. That's in my scope, right? So it's hard. I get that, but I also appreciate the desire to hone in and get super, super good at something.
Yeah, it's okay. That's you brought me back to a memory of a CEU session that I went to on, hey, what should a marriage and family therapist be doing for a client with autism, like a child client with autism? And the presenter at that session said almost exactly the same thing as was just spoken on this podcast. Like, your temptation is going to be to try to teach them about like sensory integration, which is really what the occupational therapist is going to do with them, and teach them about like food school diet, but that's what the nutritionist is going to do with them. And so what you need to do is help, and it's okay to just do this, is to help the parent understand what's happening in their interaction with their child in terms of patterns of pursuer distancer, in terms of interpreting the child's behavior as, is this resistance and defiance and misbehavior, or is this sensory seeking behavior that I'm misunderstanding, and trying to help right the ship of communication patterns to try to help the communication inputs and outputs become healthier and more comfortable for everybody. This is what marriage and family therapists always do. It's our first and sometimes only avenue for change. And it's a great one. It's okay to just be that. I wanted to wanted to kind of connect a couple of ideas and say something that hasn't been said. I really appreciated, Katie, what you were saying about getting into the humanities and philosophy and theology. There's nothing new under the sun. And we have all of these ideas that have developed into the field that we call psychology or therapy. And these ideas existed before that. They've been maybe systematized in a different way now than they had been, but ancient wisdom has some one-ups on us in our field in several areas. And so then thinking about how does faith and spirituality and really trying to understand the context of an individual client, how does faith and spirituality shape the picture of your life, your health? We can't ignore all that.
So
It's got to be
yeah,
integrated.
just to piggyback off of that, if anybody's read Jonathan Haidt's The Happiness Hypothesis, it's what you're just talking about, Jonathan. You know, he takes ancient wisdom, ancient spiritual literature, like the Book of Proverbs, for instance, and tests it against like modern day social psychology, and a lot of it holds up really well. Like that, those
Shocking. Who knew?
ancient wisdoms have a lot of truth that is still resonates to this day.
That is the one Jonathan Haidt book I have not read.
This is
I have
actually
read
my
too.
favorite one.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah, I love it.
that's high. I mean, The Righteous Mind is my favorite of his,
That's a good one
because
too.
I think it out of the ones he's written, I think it's incredibly timeless. Like I think that book will
Yeah.
be valid 50 years from now.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
it'll be valid 100 years from now. The others are really the ones that came after that. I think are more books for their time,
I
which we
think
need.
the like his like coddling of the American mind and righteous mind were like really useful for me to understand politics, but
Yeah.
happiness hypothesis was more personal for me because I'm applying this directly to my own life.
Okay, well, I'm raising that one on the need to read list. Oh, something else hit me as Jake was talking earlier. You were talking about that idea of a multidisciplinary approach. In order to have a multidisciplinary approach, you've got to be able to flexibly connect with a wide array of life experiences. And we were talking about a name or a direction to go for a potential professional identity, and that was an idea that coalesced in my head to connect that concept of some kind like multidisciplinary psychotherapy, or maybe not that word, but the part what's in the name is the idea that we are preparing clinicians to connect with um, a a wider array of we're going to focus on connecting with them a wide array of treatment systems, helping them to specialize for what they can do in their own individual role, and to connect with the widest array of client life experiences as possible, because we have research evidence that backs up that's what's going to produce quality clinicians more than any other therapist control factor. Anyway, I really like that concept, because there's an a legit organizational rationale for shaping the training in that way if you're preparing people to enter like a multidisciplinary treatment setting. Now, the treatment setting may or may not exist yet, but does it have to exist for the professional emphasis to be there? I don't know.
Freedom maxing doesn't work.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you have your box right there. Flash your box up there. There you go.
Nobody wants to see Ryan's box. Freedom maxing therapist.
Fix
Yes, there you go.
yourself.
That's going to be our we can all be FMTs. There you go.
BAMFTs.
Yes. I'll sign up for that too.
Yeah,
That would be
that could be our new certification.
yes.
The property holding LLC for my building before I sold it was BAMFT LLC. Bachelor of Arts, Marriage and Family Therapist.
Ah, makes
Yes,
sense.
exactly.
As far as
That's
you know. Yeah.
Exactly what it means.
We've been going like an hour and a half now, but I figured we could close on the question to bring in a little solution-focused therapy. So we've got this big idea, this big goal of, let's dismantle the power structures, let's deconstruct the ACA, the APA, National Association of Social Work, and let's have this other better version of psychotherapy. What is one step that we can take to get closer to that goal?
Mm.
I mean, pardon. I think it starts with you. Like whoever is listening to this, if you're in the field and you're working, it starts at the very small level of taking that responsibility, thinking about the things that you could be doing differently, the things that you've learned, the things that you think could change, applying that in your practice, talking about it with your colleagues, talking about it with other people in your life. I think it's really that small kind of ground up momentum that we really need. And I think that this is a bigger concern than maybe necessarily is understood just, from people talking about it. Because most people are just busy doing what they need to do and it's not really discussed. But I think just taking the small little steps will make a huge difference.
I think that it's something that I've discovered over the last several years. It's a proper mix of courage, because there is a lot of pressure to conform, even when we know deep within us that it's wrong, right? So it takes some courage mixed with a very astute, well-honed intellectual ability to return to first principles. And I mean autonomy, justice, fidelity, non-maleficence, and beneficence. Like, if you could trace everything back to that, why am I doing what I'm doing? And make sure they hang in balance, because that's key too. If justice gets elevated too high, you're inherently stepping on autonomy. Justice is fine. You want to act on somebody's behalf from time to time, but not at the expense of their autonomy. But you can't avoid it. But you don't want to blow it out of proportion, right? We have to hang all those in balance. And first principles of what are we doing here? I continually repeat to my patients, but also my students and my interns, ask them why they're here, and then know when they're done. We don't want to keep people in treatment in perpetuity. I find that to be incredibly unethical in our current model. If you want to be a consultant and people just pay you to talk to them, that's fine. But that's a completely different arrangement than therapy. Therapy is for a goal, for a purpose, a marked end, right? So I think those things combine. I know you asked for one thing, but I think it's three rolled together. One is have the courage to stand up when you know that it's wrong and people are either dragging their patients out session after session after session with no progress, and say, I will do it better, and decry the bad practice. That's all of them rolled together. Right? It's having the courage to call out what's bad, do what's right, and with a sharply tuned intellect to say why you're doing what you're doing, and have intentionality, know why you do what you do, right? So one foot in front of the other, act in people's behalf, do the right thing, allow them the space to act for themselves, and continue. I don't know why I'm mispronouncing all these things. Continually remind yourself that you're not in charge, right? Yield, defer, one down, mind the power dynamic. And I think that inherently becomes attractive. It becomes what the marketplace wants. People want good service. They want to get what they pay for. And that includes insurance companies. So I think the one thing we can do is just be mindful of first principles and have some courage, and keep moving forward. That's three, but whatever.
That's okay.
I can't count. I got 3 degrees. They're all in the arts. I don't do numbers. Maths.
You didn't get dragged off the stage or your mic turned off, so I think you did fine. That was good. No, that was well, unless you cancel yourself with your own soundboard, that's not out of the question. Not out of the question. One of the things I'm really blessed, thankful to work at a place that encourages me to kind of help strengthen community relationships. So at first I was like, oh dang, I don't have an answer for this question. And then in good solution focused fashion, I thought through it and I was like, wait, there are things I'm already doing that fit the model of ideas that we're talking about in a small way. So one of the things we do a mental health summit every June. We're eyebrows deep in planning that right now. And part of the spirit of that, I was able to be in on it. Yeah, exactly. Part of the spirit of that event is to get educators and therapists under the same roof. So we offer the event for free. Educators come. I invite all the therapists from the community and surrounding communities. And, we get maybe 20, 30 therapists, but that is way more interaction than you have happening among mental health professionals and educators out there. And then I'm also bringing in trainers who I trust will provide quality content that are not going to be ideologically driven presenters to create learning experiences that are based on some of these concepts that we talked about from the humanities, from good therapy, from good research. Excitingly, we're planning on, and Ryan likes this idea, we're planning on hopefully doing a podcast session on addiction
More
at this year's
podcasts.
Mental
More
Health Summit.
podcasts.
More podcasts, yeah, exactly. But so that's a very contextual example. But let me kind of roll it back a little bit. I think local community building is enormous, and not being alone in trying to venture into something like, hey, let's figure out how to create a new training pathway for therapists. Like, I think if we're creating some local community, some nearby community among people we can find, or community of people like Jake's and Ryan's and Katie's who are in similar boats across the country and are trying to think about how to do these things, creating just learning opportunities, peer supervision among people who can help sharpen you and help you think through things like this.
I want to change my answer, if I may. One word.
Do it.
Mentorship.
Mm,
That's the answer.
huge.
You've got to bring people into the fold and train them up. Mentorship. That's my answer. That's the one thing that we can do to really change things.
That's huge. Guys, I love this discussion. All of you are doing such good work to reform the therapy profession that is so necessary, because there's so many people out there who need us and they need good care and not what they're getting now. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my book, The Woke Mind, The Twisted Psychology of the Social Justice Movement, available on Amazon.